For decades, the image of the Neanderthal has stood as a symbol of prehistoric brutishness, low brows, hunched shoulders, clutching a heavy wooden club, trudging silently through the forest, living by instinct, half beast, without speech or intellect. Popular culture reinforced this stereotype through movies, outdated textbooks, and early museum exhibits. The term Neanderthal became an insult, implying backwardness, ignorance, and savagery. But modern archaeology has slowly rewritten that narrative in the 21st century. In Shanidar Cave, Iraq, scientists uncovered a Neanderthal skeleton buried with pollen, evidence of deliberate burial, possibly symbolic or ritualistic. In El Cedron, Spain, they found traces of rope making, sorted animal bones, and meticulously crafted stone tools. Numerous sites show Neanderthals used fire deliberately, not just to burn, but to cook, to heat, and to light. In France, ancient cave paintings, once thought solely the work of Homo sapiens, are now possibly attributed to Neanderthals. The abstract forms, mineral pigments, and symbolic compositions reveal complex symbolic thought, abstraction, and perhaps even spirituality. Neanderthals lived in Europe and Western Asia for hundreds of thousands of years. Far longer than Homo sapiens have existed in those regions. They weren't outsiders to history, nor were they a lesser human. They were an independent evolutionary branch, genetically the closest to us. In fact, at times, Neanderthals surpassed Homo sapiens in strength, cold resilience, and local survival skills. Science hasn't just changed what we call them, it's redefined their place in our story. Once seen as evolutionary dead ends, Neanderthals are now recognized as an unfinished chapter in our shared human journey. So what happens when we remove our biases and revisit the past through the lens of modern science? What emerges from the dust of time when we dig deeper into bones, DNA, and traces of behavior? It's more than rewriting a footnote in history. It's looking into an ancient mirror, long forgotten. And in that mirror, we might see something startling. Neanderthals weren't the other. They are a part of us. Part 2. They live in our blood. About 1 to 2% of the DNA of modern Europeans and Asians comes from Neanderthals. This isn't speculation. It's a fact confirmed by large-scale genetic analyses over the past 2 decades. If you live in the West, North Africa, the Middle East, Central or East Asia, chances are you carry genetic material from a human species that went extinct tens of thousands of years ago. That mixing began with a historic encounter around 60,000 years ago. When Homo sapiens, modern humans, migrated out of Africa, they entered the icy territories of Europe and Western Asia, lands long inhabited by Neanderthals. They did not arrive in an empty world. They entered one that was already claimed, and then the two kinds of humans met. What happened in that moment? Initially, perhaps mistrust, competition for land, and survival conflicts. But over time, that relationship evolved. The strangers learned to share space, resources, and eventually, blood. Genetic evidence shows interbreeding between Homo sapiens and Neanderthals wasn't a one-time event. It happened repeatedly, frequently enough to leave a permanent mark in our modern genome. What was the result of those encounters? Children, carrying half the DNA of modern humans, half from those who survived the Ice Age, and from those children, Neanderthal genes began to diffuse through Homo sapiens populations, passed down generation after generation until today. To some, 1 or 2% might seem small, but biologically, it's significant. It proves that Neanderthals weren't mere side characters in human history. They didn't vanish completely. They merged into us. They live in our blood, our tissues, in strands of DNA still active in our cells. History is often told through bones and tools. But there's another form of history, quieter, deeper, etched into our genetic material. Every cell in your body carries a copy of the past. And part of that past is Neanderthal, a species that once walked through snow, lit fires in the dark, and still lingers silently without ever truly disappearing. Part 3. Hybrid children, born of two worlds. In a Romanian cave called Pestera Coase, meaning bone cave, archaeologists discovered an extraordinary relic, a human jawbone around 40,000 years old. But its scientific value lay not in its shape, but in what it contained. When researchers analyzed the DNA, they found that about 9% of its genome came from Neanderthals. This wasn't some distant inheritance. It pointed to a close relationship, perhaps a Neanderthal grandfather, or even a father. This was a real person who lived, not an abstract idea. If we could recreate this hybrid child's appearance, they might have the tall, flexible body and lightly dark skin of Homo sapiens, but the facial traits of Neanderthals: broad cheekbones, low forehead, strong jaw, and large teeth. A body blending two evolutionary paths, two humans once thought incompatible. The real question isn't just genetics, it's anthropological. Who raised this child? Did they grow up among Homo sapiens or Neanderthals? Were they loved and cared for, or treated as an outsider? In a world without textbooks or the word hybrid, could they feel the difference in the way others looked at them? We may never have full answers, but we have evidence, not just from Pestera Coase, but from hundreds of genomes worldwide. And from that, one thing becomes clear. This child was not alone. They were part of a broader phenomenon where meetings between Homo sapiens and Neanderthals didn't just create genes, they created people. Today, over 7 billion people are alive. And for billions of them, in every cell is a genetic memory from children like that, those who carried two worlds in one body. History isn't always written in stone and fire. Sometimes it's passed down through blood. And in that blood are stories untold, yet never lost. Hybrid children weren't historical exceptions. They are proof of our capacity to merge, survive, and continue. Part 4. A legacy in hair, bones, and scent. When you look in the mirror each morning, see a stubborn curl, get goosebumps in the cold, or feel nauseated by heavy perfume, it may seem personal, random, unrelated to anyone else. But science says otherwise. Those subtle traits might be remnants from an extinct human species, Neanderthals. Modern genetic studies have found that some Neanderthal genes are still active in our bodies today, directly influencing our appearance and physiology. For example, hair color, ranging from deep brown to red, may be influenced by Neanderthal variants. Likewise, hair texture, body hair density, and beard growth can also be shaped by those ancient genes. Beyond appearance, physical traits carry their imprint. Average height, bone structure, muscle density, all can be slightly modulated by Neanderthal DNA. In some cases, these genes increased bone density, useful adaptations for cold climates and rugged terrain where Neanderthals once thrived. Smell is another domain clearly affected. Some people can detect wood smoke from afar, or are unusually sensitive to spoiled food, wet animal scents, or raw flesh. These abilities aren't just quirks. They may be survival traits shaped in the harsh environments Neanderthals called home. In such worlds, detecting fire, rot, or meat could mean the difference between life and death. A striking example is cold tolerance. Some people feel fine in freezing temperatures, while others shiver at 15 degrees. Part of this comes from genetic variants that enhance internal heat production, regulate blood flow in the limbs, and stabilize core temperature, mechanisms once vital for survival in sunless, frozen caves. All of this, from hair to bones, from smell to cold response, isn't biological coincidence. It's an evolutionary map, clues left behind from the blending of Homo sapiens and Neanderthals. You don't need to be an archaeologist or geneticist To feel that influence, you just need to notice yourself. Those little things that seem uniquely you, but are written from a shared story tens of thousands of years old. Neanderthals no longer exist, but they never truly vanished. Part of them lives on, beneath your skin, in the texture of your hair, in your senses and instincts. Their legacy, just 1 or 2%, continues to shape the person you are today. Part 5. A kiss from prehistory. An ancient human tooth discovered in El Cedron cave in northern Spain unlocked an unusual window into the past, not through its shape or age, but through bacteria. When scientists analyzed the hardened plaque still clinging to the tooth, they found traces of a microorganism called Methanobrevibacter oralis. This is not an exotic microbe. In fact, it lives today in the mouths of millions of people as a common part of the oral microbiome. The surprise, however, lies in this. For years, Methanobrevibacter oralis was thought to be exclusive to Homo sapiens. So how did a Neanderthal, an entirely different species, carry this bacterium in their mouth over 120,000 years ago? And why is it still found in ours today? According to microbiologists and ancient DNA specialists, the answer is clear. This bacterium couldn't have come from the environment, or from animals, air, or soil. It only spreads through human-to-human contact, through shared meals, pre-chewed food, or a kiss. That means there must have been close, intimate contact between Neanderthals and Homo sapiens. Not violence, not hunting, but eating together, drinking from the same source, perhaps even touching lips, licking food from a finger, or other instinctive gestures of care. From one tooth, we find more than bacteria. We uncover biological proof of a relationship long buried by prejudice. The idea that Neanderthals and Homo sapiens were only rivals. But clearly, they once lived side by side, ate together, and in some cases, loved each other. No textbook has a sentence that says, "Two ancient humans kissed." But bacteria tell that story. They don't lie. They preserve the evidence of intimacy across species lines, beyond evolutionary boundaries. That prehistoric kiss isn't a modern romance. It's biological evidence, but also a profound reminder. Intimacy once existed, quietly, beyond bias, deeply human. Part 6. When love leaves consequences. Sex is more than a biological act. It is the engine of reproduction, a channel for passing on genes, and also a pathway for disease transmission. One of the clearest, most enduring examples is HPV, human papillomavirus, the most common sexually transmitted virus in the world today, linked to conditions from genital warts to cervical cancer. But few realize that HPV's history didn't begin in modern times. It has accompanied humanity for tens of thousands of years, possibly longer. When scientists compared HPV genomes across global populations, they discovered an unusual distribution pattern. People with ancestry in Europe and Asia, those with Neanderthal DNA, often carry the HPV-A strain. Meanwhile, African populations who lack Neanderthal ancestry carry HPV-B and HPV-C strains. This isn't coincidence. Genetic evidence shows that HPV-A began to spread around the same time Homo sapiens left Africa and first encountered Neanderthals in Europe and West Asia, approximately 60,000 years ago. That means, along with genes, humans and Neanderthals also exchanged viruses, and not just once. Deeper analysis shows that HPV transmission between the species occurred repeatedly over generations. Viruses don't care about species. All they need is contact, sexual activity, intimate behavior to move from one body to another, from Neanderthal to modern human, or vice versa. What was the outcome? From an evolutionary perspective, interbreeding between Homo sapiens and Neanderthals introduced diverse gene combinations. Some enhanced immunity, cold resistance, or adaptability, but others came with baggage, like HPV, a legacy that persists to this day. This is the reality of genetics. No gene exchange is purely beneficial. Every mixing of blood is a gamble. You might gain cold tolerance, but also risk autoimmune disease. You might inherit virus resistance, but also carry the virus itself. Even ancient love carries consequences. And genetics, like history, always brings both hope and hazard, evolution and burden. Those consequences are still present in our genes, our illnesses, and our very cells. Part 7. Real families. Neanderthals didn't build houses. They left no books, no written records of daily life. But fossils and chemistry tell a different story, a story of family, care, and connection. Isotope analysis from Neanderthal infant teeth and bones reveals a clear pattern of child rearing. Babies were breastfed up to around 9 months, then weaned at about 13 to 14 months, remarkably similar to modern human practices. This isn't random behavior. It reflects deep attachment, long-term investment in offspring, typical of socially organized and cognitively developed species. Genetic data reveals even more surprising insights. In some groups, older Neanderthal women had children with younger males. This challenges modern assumptions about ancient family dynamics. In Neanderthal society, perhaps what mattered was not youth, but experience, knowledge of healing, parenting, and the environment, qualities that could determine whether a child survived. It wasn't just mothers and children. Neanderthals lived in close-knit groups. At many archaeological sites, researchers have found rope-making tools, evidence of leather stitching, and healed fractures, indicating that injured individuals received extended care. In some caves, the dead were buried with objects, necklaces of animal teeth, drilled shells, carved bones, items with no survival function, but emotional or symbolic meaning. From these scattered clues, a picture emerges of people who could hunt, who cared for the sick, who treasured meaningful items, and who left tokens for their dead. If we call that emotion, attachment, or love, then Neanderthals weren't just Ice Age survivors. They were human beings who lived for one another. They didn't need written language. They didn't need stone monuments. With bones, rope, and marks on teeth, Neanderthals left behind the most important evidence of a society with elders, children, bonds, and a community that gave and received more than mere instinct. They didn't just survive, they lived, and they loved. Part 8. Melting into modern humans. The extinction of the Neanderthals didn't come with a bang. There were no eruptions, no falling meteors, no final roar echoing through the stone valleys. Their disappearance was not violent, but slow and weary. Around 40,000 years ago, Europe's climate turned harsh. Winters grew longer. Food, already scarce, became harder to find. Reindeer and bison herds migrated farther away. Neanderthal groups, already small and scattered, became isolated, cut off by ice, mountains, and dwindling numbers. In such conditions, inbreeding became common, not by choice, but by necessity. And inbreeding triggered biological decline, weaker infants, higher disease risk, lower survival rates. The spiral was irreversible. Despite their intelligence, tools, fires, and care, it wasn't enough. But Neanderthals didn't entirely vanish. Before they faded, they met others, Homo sapiens. And in those meetings, there was more than competition. There was connection. They mated, they had children, and those children, part Neanderthal, continued living. Not as a separate species, but as part of the expanding Homo sapiens population. Today, when you test your DNA, you may find their traces, a segment of Neanderthal code, quietly resting in your blood, your immune system, or the way your skin reacts to cold. These aren't relics, they are legacy. Neanderthals didn't just leave bones, they left part of you. History isn't only written through conquest, it's written through absorption. And Neanderthals, though no longer a separate species, still live on in every modern human cell. We are not solely the descendants of Homo sapiens. We are the result of many ancient branches, blended, mixed, and melted together over tens of thousands of years. Inside your body Our story's yet to be fully told, and Neanderthal is a chapter inseparable from who you are today.